I rode into Larkalo in a dead man's cloak, and no one who saw me guessed that the hungry town belonged to me. That was the point. A king learns nothing when the world dresses to be seen by him. So I had left the crown in its iron box at Highhold, cut my hair short and ragged, rubbed ash and river mud into my hands until they looked like a laborer's hands, and ridden south on a lame-gaited packhorse instead of the gray warhorse the songs give me. My name, for as long as I needed one, was Call. A tinker's name. A nobody's name. The kind of name a man carries when he has nothing left worth stealing. I had come to find out who was starving my people, and I meant to find him by walking among them until he showed his teeth. The famine was real. I had not needed disguise to know that. 3 winters of thin harvests had scraped the gray reach down to the bone, and I had emptied the pack's stores twice over to hold the line against it. Grain went out from Highhold in loaded wagons, more grain than any honest accounting of the land's hunger could explain. And yet the reports that came back spoke of empty granaries, of villages eating seed corn, of old wolves lying down in the snow and not rising. Somewhere between my hand and my people's mouths, a river of bread was running dry into someone's pocket. My steward's ledger said the grain had been delivered. My people's faces said otherwise. One of those 2 things was lying to me, and ledgers do not have faces I can read. So I would read faces instead. Larkalo sat where the Vero River bent around a mill, a huddle of gray stone and grayer thatch under a sky the color of old pewter. It was a milling town. It should have smelled of flour and warm bread and the sweet dust that hangs in the air where grain is ground. It smelled instead of wood smoke and cold, and something underneath both that I knew too well from old campaigns. The flat, sour smell of people who were not eating enough. I felt my wolf stir under my skin at that smell, low and angry, the way he always stirred when the pack was wounded. I pressed him down. A beggar named Call did not have a king's wolf riding behind his eyes. Not yet. I walked the packhorse up the frozen ruts of the main street and let the town look me over. They looked the way hungry towns always look at a stranger, quick, wary, hoping I had something and afraid I had come to take something. A woman drew her child back against a doorframe. 2 men at the smithy stopped talking and watched me pass with the flat patience of people who had learned that watching cost nothing and trust cost everything. I gave them all the same stooped, tired, harmless nod, and I marked them, one by one, the way I had been trained to mark a battlefield. Who was thin and who was not, whose boots were sound, whose door had a good lock on a poor house, because a good lock on a poor house means something inside worth locking away. The granary told me the most, and it told me before I reached it. It stood at the top of the town, above the mill, a long stone building with a slate roof and a new iron-bound door, and it was guarded. 2 men in the steward's green leaned on spears at its threshold, well-fed men with color in their cheeks, and that single fact was louder than any confession. A granary in a starving town should be empty and unguarded, its door hanging open on nothing. A granary that is guarded is a granary that is full. Someone was standing spear and shield over bread while the people who grew that bread went to their beds hollow. I looked at those 2 well-fed men and I felt the old cold clarity settle over me, the battle calm, and I thought, there. Some of the answer is behind that door, but not all of it. A guarded door is a symptom. I had come for the disease. I found the inn, the Hollow Cask, a mean little place with more cobweb than custom, and I paid for a corner of the common floor with a chipped copper, and I sat with my back to the wall and my hood up and I listened. That is the true work of a spy, and no one tells you it is mostly a kind of patience close to prayer. You sit. You nurse a cup of thin ale you do not drink. You let the room forget you are there, and the town talks over your head as if you were a stool. They talked of the ration. That was the word that came up again and again, always with a curse or a lowered voice behind it. The ration. It seemed the steward, a man they called Steward Vane, and never kindly, had set a ration on the town's own flour. The mill could grind only what the steward's men allowed. The rest of the grain, the town's grain, the grain they had grown and threshed with their own hands, was carted up to that guarded granary for the pack's common stores by the king's own need. By my need. My name on the lips of the man who was doing this, laid over the theft like a clean cloth over rot. I sat very still when I heard that. It is one thing to know a wound exists. It is another to hear the knife named and to hear it wearing your own crest. I might have gone up to that granary that night and torn the iron door off its hinges and had my answer in blood by moonrise. My wolf wanted it. He is always simplest when he is angriest. But a king who acts on the first true thing he learns is a king who never learns the second, deeper thing, the how of it, the who else of it, the long root of the rot. Vain had guards, ledgers, my own name to hide behind, and somewhere a buyer for all that stolen grain, because a man does not hoard bread he cannot sell. I needed the whole of it. I needed proof that would stand in the light, before the pack, before the law, so that when I broke him for good and not just for a season. So I would stay call a while longer, I would be patient, I would be hungry with them and learn. I did not know yet that the deepest thing I would learn in Larkalo had nothing to do with grain. I learned it that first evening, in the last gray light, from a girl and a heel of bread. I had gone back out into the cold to walk the town once more before full dark to fix its shape in my mind. At the corner where the mill lane met the market square, there was a child sitting against the well, a boy 6 or 7, too still, the dangerous stillness of a child too tired to cry. No mother near him. His feet were wrapped in rags. I had seen 100 such children on 100 such roads, and I had learned, God forgive me, to walk past them, because a king who stops for one stops for all and drowns. I was telling myself that lie, my feet already carrying me past, when a young woman came across the square with a basket on her arm and stopped at the boy as though he were the only thing in the world. She knelt in the frozen mud in front of him. She had a plain gray shawl over her hair and a plain thin face gone pink at the nose with cold, and there was nothing in her, nothing at all, that a man would build a song around. She was not fine. She was not fed. Her wrists, where the shawl slipped, were as thin as the boy's, and out of her basket, a basket that held, I could see, almost nothing, she took a heel of dark bread, her own, plainly meant to be her supper, and she broke it. Not gave it, broke it. Kept the smaller piece for herself, and pressed the larger into the boy's rag-wrapped hands, and folded his fingers over it, and said something low that made the boy, at last, begin to cry, the good kind, the kind that means the frozen thing inside has thought enough to hurt. I stood in the shadow of the mill house, and watched a starving girl give the better half of her last bread to a child who was not hers, when she thought no one in the world was watching. And something happened in me that I had no name for and no defense against. A warmth, small and sudden and low in the chest, in the place where my wolf lives, not the hot anger I had felt at the granary, but its opposite, a heat like a coal breathed back to life after long banking. I had not felt it in years. I did not think I could still feel it. Kings do not mostly. The years grind it out of us with the crown. I felt it now, watching this nobody kneel in the mud, and my wolf lifted his head inside me, not to hunt, but to look at her the way he had never looked at anyone, and go very, very still. I told myself it was only pity. I told myself it was only that I was cold and hungry and playing at being cold and hungry, and the sight of one small mercy had loosened something the road had tightened. I told myself a great many things, standing there, because the other thing, the thing my wolf already knew, the thing that warmth was impossible, and beneath a king, and not why I had come. The girl rose and gathered her near-empty basket and turned to go, and for one moment her eyes crossed the shadow where I stood, and found me, the ragged stranger, the beggar, watching her. And she did not flinch. She looked at me the way she had looked at the boy, as though I too might be hungry, as though I too might be worth kneeling for. Then she walked away into the dark toward the mill, and I stood with that impossible warmth burning low in my chest, and for the first time since I had put on the dead man's cloak, I forgot entirely that I was a king. I told myself I would not seek her out. I sought her out by the next morning. I made myself a reason, because a man like me always needs a reason he can say aloud to himself. The mill was the heart of the town's grain, I told myself. Whoever moved the grain moved it through or around that mill. The miller and his household would know the shape of the theft better than anyone, whether they knew that they knew it. So it was only good spycraft to make myself known at the mill. That was the reason, I said. The truth was that I had slept badly against the inn wall with the memory of a broken heel of bread turning over and over in me like a stone in a boot, and I wanted to see her face again in daylight and find it ordinary and be free. I went down to the mill at first light with my hood up and my shoulders bent and offered myself for work. This is easy to do when you are willing to be paid in nothing. A famine town has more labor than it can feed. A man who will haul and mend for a meal and a floor to sleep on is a bargain even to the poor. The miller came out to look me over, a big, stooped, gray-bearded man with flour ground so deep into the creases of his hands it would never wash out, and a careful, tired kindness in him that I recognized before he spoke a word, because I had seen it kneeling in the mud the evening before. Her father, of course. Aldous, the miller of Larkalo. He looked at my hands, which I had let go rough, and at my eyes, which I could not let go anything but what they were, and something in him hesitated over me a half-beat longer than a beggar warranted. But hunger makes men incurious about their good luck. He took me on. And she was there. Eloin's. I had her name by mid-morning, spoken by her father across the millyard. Eloin, fetch the small measure. Eloin is the sluice cleared, and each time he said it something in my chest answered before my mind could stop it. In daylight she was exactly what she had been in the dusk and nothing more. A plain, thin, quick-handed young woman in a patched gray dress, with river-reddened hands and a way of tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist because her fingers were floured. Ordinary. I made myself catalogue her ordinariness like a miser counting proof of his own sanity. There, nothing, a miller's daughter, be free. I was not free. My wolf watched her cross the yard the way he watched the tree line before a battle, total, silent, certain. And the warmth would not go out. She brought me water at midday without my asking. That was the first thing she said to me, really said, not counting the water. You've the look of a long road on you. Not a question. An observation gentle made while she was already turning away so that I could answer or not without shame. I said I had come a long way, which was true, and that I was looking for honest work, which was less true, and that I had not eaten since the day before, which was a lie I told to see what she would do. I am not proud of that. I have done many hard things as a king and slept afterward, but I am not easy about that small lie because of what it bought. She stopped. She looked at me, really looked, the way she had looked at me across the square, the way that had no floor to it, no reckoning of what I might cost her. And then she did the thing I have never in my life been able to forget. She took the bread out of her own apron pocket, the bread she had brought out to eat while she worked because there was no midday meal in that house for anyone, a small dark heel of it, her own, and she broke it. Kept the smaller piece, held out the larger. Then you'll have this, she said, as if it were the plainest arithmetic in the world. As if a hungry man and a piece of bread simply belonged together and it would be strange, almost rude, to keep them apart. I have had feasts laid before me on gold. I have had whole herds slaughtered in my honor, and casks broached that were older than my father, and the finest cooks of the reach weep for fear of displeasing me. I have never in my life been given anything the way that plain girl gave me half of her last bread in a cold millyard, expecting nothing, not even thanks, not even that I be worth it. I took it. Our fingers touched, hers cold and floured, mine rough with borrowed roughness, and the warmth in my chest went up all at once like a banked fire when the wind finds it, up my throat, behind my eyes, into the very roots of me. And my wolf, my old scarred silent wolf who had not spoken plainly to me since my father died, said one word inside me, clear as a struck bell. Mind. I nearly dropped the bread. I stood in that yard, a king in a beggar's cloak, holding half a starving woman's supper, and I understood all at once and against every plan I had made and every wall I had built that I had ridden 200 cold miles hunting a thief and found, in the last place a king would think to look, in the poorest house in a poor town, the one thing a king can search a whole life for and never find. My mate, the fated one. The other half of the bond that our kind spend our lives half believing is only a story we tell to make the long dark bearable. Here, her, this thin, kind, ordinary, extraordinary woman who fed the hungry with her own mouth's bread when she thought no one who mattered was watching. I ate the bread because to refuse it would have hurt her, and it was the finest thing I have ever tasted, and I hated in that moment everything I was, the crown, the lie, the ash on my hands, because every part of it stood between us like a drawn sword. Thank you, I said, and my voice came out wrong, too low, too much in it, and I saw her notice, saw the small flicker of a question cross her face, because a beggar does not thank a girl for bread as if she had pulled him from a river. I turned it aside. I made myself stoop lower, mumble, be call. It's been a lean road, I said. Kindness surprises a man. There's little enough of anything else to go round, she said, so we may as well not run short on that too. And she smiled, not a beautiful smile, a tired one, a crooked one, worth more than any beauty, and went back to her work and left me standing there ruined. I want you to understand the size of the trouble I was in, because everything that came after grew from it. I had come to Larkalow as a king in secret, to gather proof against a thief, to do cold work coldly and ride home. That plan required me to be no one, to move through these people like water through a net, touching nothing, owing nothing, so that when the time came I could act without a single strand of my heart caught in the mesh. And in one morning, with one heel of bread, all of that had become impossible. You cannot be no one to your fated mate. The bond does not permit it. From the moment my wolf said mine, every hour I stayed call was an hour I lied to the one person in the world I was built to never lie to. And every hour I did not stay call was an hour I risked the whole work, because Steward Vane could not know the king was in his town until I had the rope already around his neck, or he would simply vanish, and the grain with him, and the truth with the grain. I could not tell her, I could not be near her. So I did the only thing left, the coward's brave thing. I stayed, and I lied, and I watched her, and I let the warmth grow in me like a wound I had no wish to heal. That evening, I learned the second thing about Aloan, the thing that turned my private ruin into something far more dangerous. I had gone out again at dusk, telling myself I was watching the granary, and but I was also watching for her. And so I saw her leave the mill after her father had banked the fire, a covered basket on her arm, and slip not homeward, but down toward the low lanes where the town's poorest crowded, the day laborers and the widows and the ones already half-starved past working. And I followed her, quiet as my kind can be quiet, and I watched her go from mean door to mean door in the dark, and at each one leave a little. A twist of flour, a few eggs, a heel of bread, a handful of dried beans, the whole of her basket, which was the whole of what her own thin household could spare and more than it could spare, given away in the dark to people who would never be able to repay her, given so quietly that half of them, I think, believed it was the work of some kind spirit, and not a miller's hungry daughter walking the cold with less and less in her basket, and more light in her step. She was feeding the town, one heel at a time in the dark from her own share, against a famine, against a thief with a guarded granary, one woman with a basket. It was hopeless. It was the most hopeful thing I had ever seen. And as she came back up the empty lane toward home with her basket light and her head high, thinking herself unseen, I saw something else move in the dark behind her. Two shapes, broad-shouldered, following, and on the shoulder of one of them, caught for half a breath in the light of a shuttered window, the dull green of the steward's livery. Vane's men were watching her too. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the mill's cold loft with my back to a beam and my wolf pacing behind my ribs, and I made myself think like a king again, because a king was what she needed now, whether she would ever know it or not. Two of Vane's men had followed her home. That could mean three things. It could mean nothing, a patrol, a coincidence, men going the same dark way. It could mean the steward had marked her charity as theft, because a man who is stealing the town's grain must call anyone who feeds the town a thief, or his own guilt will show by contrast. Or it could mean the worst thing, that Vane had noticed, as clever criminals always eventually notice, the one honest person in his reach who could not be bought or frightened, and had begun to think about what to do with her. I have hunted men, and I have been hunted, and I know that a corrupt power fears an incorruptible poor man more than it fears an army. The army it can meet. The honest man it cannot answer, and so it must remove. I decided I would not let Aloan out of my sight after dark, and I told myself this was strategy. Perhaps it was. My wolf did not care what I called it. Over the days that followed, I did two kinds of work, and they braided together tighter than I liked. By day and in the open, I was called the drifter, mending the mill's cracked hopper, clearing the ice from the sluice, hauling the pitiful allowed sacks of grain the steward's men delivered under guard each dawn. This gave me eyes on the machinery of the theft, and it gave me hours near Aloan, which was the other work, the one I did not admit to, the one that was slowly remaking me. The theft, seen up close, was a beautiful, ugly thing. I will give Vane this, he was no crude looter. He had built a system. Each dawn a wagon came down from the granary under 2 spears, and the miller was permitted to grind a fixed measure, enough that the town did not quite riot, not enough that anyone grew strong. The rest of the town's harvest, threshed and stored through the autumn, had already been requisitioned to the pack's common stores by the king's need, and sat behind that iron door. And from that door I began to learn, wagons went out again, not to the town, not to Highhold, but north and by night, down to the river, to a landing below the falls where the Vero turned navigable, and barges could take a cargo quietly downstream to the border, and across it, into the lands of the Caro packs who had grain gold and a bad harvest of their own and no love for me. Vane was starving my people to sell their bread to my rivals at famine prices. The king's need was the mask. Greed was the face. And every ledger in the steward's hall would show the grain delivered honestly to the crown, because the ledgers were his, and the crown, as far as Larkalo knew, was 200 miles away and blind. I gathered it slowly and I gathered it carefully. A word from a wagoner who did not know he was talking. The tally marks I counted in and out of that door which never balanced. The name of the river landing which I got from a boy for a copper. The name Caro which I got from a drunk. Piece by piece I built the shape of it in my mind, and I knew that the shape was not yet proof. I needed a ledger, a real one, the true accounting vein surely kept hidden against his partner's cheating, because thieves trust no one, and a thief this careful would keep a book that told the truth so that his buyers could not rob the robber. Find that book and I would have him. Everything else was smoke. And in between the pieces of that cold work, there was a Lowen warming me by inches. We talked as we labored, the way people do when their hands are busy and their guards are down. She was not a simple woman. I had feared, God forgive me, that her goodness might be simplicity, that she gave because she did not understand the world, and that once I knew her I would find the ordinary limit of her and be cured. I found the opposite. She understood the world exactly. She knew the town was being robbed. She said so plainly, quietly, with a bitterness she kept banked, because bitterness, she said, does no one any good and eats the one who holds it. She knew her own giving could not save the town. I know a heel of bread doesn't mend a famine, she said to me once, threading a broken cord back through the mill's tackle, not looking at me. My father says I'm foolish. He's right in the sums of it, but I'll tell you what I think, Call, and you can laugh. I think the famine isn't the worst thing that's come to us. The worst thing is that it's teaching everyone to look at a hungry child and calculate, to decide the child isn't worth the bread because the bread won't fix everything. And I think if I ever learn to make that calculation and call it wisdom, then whatever's stealing our grain will have stolen something out of me too, something I'd rather starve than lose. So I give the bread, not to fix it, to keep from being fixed by it. Do you see? I sat in that mill in my beggar's rags with the future of a kingdom's grain law being written in me syllable by syllable, and I saw that this thin girl had reasoned her way, alone, in a starving town, to the truest principle of rule I had ever heard spoken, and that she lived by it where I, with all my power, had let my stores be plundered while I trusted a ledger. I had come to test the honesty of my realm. I was the one being tested, and she was the examiner, and she did not even know there was an examination. I tested her once deliberately, and I am ashamed of it and glad of it both. There was a man in the low lanes, a hard, sour, ungrateful man named Pell who had cursed at a Lowen more than once when she left food at his door, too proud, or too broken, to bear the charity and mean with it. I said to her, carelessly, as we worked, that surely a woman with so little to give should give it to those who at least had the grace to be thankful, and let the Pells of the world curse and starve. I said it to see the shape of her mercy, whether it had a floor, whether it was really only love of being loved back, as so much charity is. She set down what she was holding, and she looked at me with something close to anger, the only time I ever saw it in her. He curses me because he's ashamed, she said. Shame is just pain that hasn't found anywhere to go. If I only fed the grateful, I wouldn't be feeding the hungry, Call. I'd be buying thanks, and thanks I can live without. It's the bread he can't. Then the anger went out of her as fast as it had come, and she almost smiled. Besides, he'll be kind again someday when he's able. Everyone is when they're able. I've decided to believe that. It's cheaper than the alternative, and it lets me sleep. I have executed men for treason with a steadier heart than I carried out of that conversation. She had passed a test she did not know she was taking, and in passing it she had shown me the exact measure of what I had found and what I stood to lose, and the size of the lie I was telling her grew that day past the point where I could pretend it was small. That night the test stopped being mine. I was in the yard past dark, ostensibly mending, truly waiting for her to make her round so I could follow and guard her, when the trouble came up the mill lane loud instead of quiet. 4 of the steward's men and a wagon and torches, and a family, a widow named Sarn and her 2 half-grown children, dragged along in the torchlight, the widow's arms wrapped around a single small sack of grain as if it were a child, screaming that it was her seed corn, her spring, all she had. The steward's man reading from a paper, unlicensed hoarding against the ration, forfeit to the pack's stores by the king's need. My name again on the theft in the torchlight, while a widow was stripped of her last bread by well-fed men. And a Lowen came out of the mill and walked straight into the middle of it. Every instinct I owned told me to move. My wolf came up hard and fast under my skin, the way he comes before a killing, and it took the whole of a king's discipline to hold my feet still in that shadow, because if Call the beggar laid 4 of the steward's men out in the frozen mud with a warrior's ease, then Call the beggar was finished, and the king in secret with him, and the true book still hidden, and the whole long patient work undone in a moment of righteous temper. So I held. It was the hardest holding of my life, and it was Eloan who made it possible, because she walked into that torchlight and did with words what I wanted to do with my hands, and did it better. She did not shout. She did not curse the steward's men, though they deserved it. She stepped between the widow, Sarn, and the man with the paper, and she said in a voice pitched to carry across the whole gathering dark crowd, for a crowd was gathering now, drawn by the torches and the screaming, the whole low end of the town coming out of its doors, she said, "Read it again. The part about the king's need. Read it loud so we can all hear what the king needs from a widow's seed corn." The man hesitated. That was his mistake, and she was on it like a hawk. "You won't," she said, "because you know as well as I do that the king in his hall doesn't know Sarn's name and never took a grain of hers, and if he knew what was being carted off in his name, he'd hang the man who ordered it. This isn't the king's need. We all know whose need it is. It goes up that hill, and it doesn't come to any of us, and we've stopped even pretending we don't know where it goes after." She turned from the man to the crowd, and her thin, plain face in the torchlight was suddenly not plain at all. "Take her corn tonight if you take it. But every soul in this lane just heard you say the word king over a robbery, and words like that have a way of climbing back uphill in the end. I'd think about that if I served the man who sent you. I have commanded armies, and I have never seen a position turned so cleanly by someone with no weapon, but the truth spoken at the right moment. The steward's men were 4, armed, and in the right by the letter of a corrupt law. They were also, suddenly, standing in front of 40 of their own townsfolk who had just been reminded aloud that the thing being done was theft dressed as duty, and that the crowd knew it, and that the men doing it would be remembered. A mob will not rise for an abstract wrong. It will rise for a widow's seed corn under torchlight when someone brave has just named the wrong out loud. The steward's men felt the lane tilt under them. The one with the paper looked at the crowd, and looked at the small sack, and made the calculation that Eloan had left him no good way out of. Take the corn and light a fire in this town tonight, or leave it and lose nothing but a widow's ruin they had not truly needed. He left the corn. He said something ugly to save his face, that they'd be back, that hoarding would be answered, that some people talked themselves into trouble, and he looked at Eloan when he said the last, looked at her the way a man looks who is memorizing a face to give to his master. Then they took their empty wagon and their torches back up the hill, and the lane let out its breath, and the widow Sarn was on her knees in the mud with her corn and her children and Eloan's arms around all 3 of them. And I stood in the dark shaking with the effort of not having become a king in front of everyone. I understood 2 things clearly that night. The first was that I loved her, not the bond only, not my wolf certainty only, but I, the man, the tired king behind the crown, loved this woman for what she was, and would have loved her if there had been no bond at all. The second was that she had just, in front of 40 witnesses and 4 of Vane's men, made herself the most dangerous person in Larkalo to the man I had come to destroy. She had spoken the word king over his theft in public. She had turned a crowd. A steward who was selling his kingdom's grain to its enemies could not afford a miller's daughter who could do that. She had signed her own danger, and she had done it to save a widow's spring planting, and she would do it again tomorrow, and the knowing of that was a cold hand on the back of my neck. I needed help, and I needed it without breaking cover, and so that night I did the thing I had held in reserve. There is a call my kind can send, wolf to wolf, over the miles, not words, but a pull, a summons along the old lines of pack and blood that only one who is looking for it will feel. I had left, camped a half-day's ride back in the winter woods, the single man in the world who knew where I had gone and what I wore. Osric, my shield captain, my sworn wolf, the one soul I trusted with my life and my secret both. He had argued against this whole disguise, cursed me for it, and then done as I asked because that is what he does. He was waiting for exactly this. In the cold loft of the mill, with Eloan's household finally sleeping below me, I closed my eyes and I sent the call north into the dark. And far off, faint, I felt the answer come back, heard, and knew that by tomorrow's dusk I would not be entirely alone in this. Osric came the next night, and he came the right way, as a ragged traveler like me, no green, no steel showing, a nobody sharing a nobody's fire in the woods above the town where I met him after dark. He took one look at me, at the ash in my hair, the beggar's cloak, the thing in my face, and his own face went through surprise and worry to a wariness I had never seen him turn on me. "You found the thief," he said. "Good, so why do you look like a man who's lost something instead?" I told him, all of it, the granary, the ledgers, the river landing, Caro, the shape of Vane's whole beautiful ugly machine. He listened like the soldier he is, sharp and still. And then I told him the other thing, because I have never lied to Osric and was not going to start with the largest truth of my life. I told him about the bread, and the warmth, and the word my wolf had said, and who had said it about. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, carefully, the way you speak to a man standing near an edge, "A miller's daughter." "Yes. Your fated mate is a starving miller's daughter in the town your own steward is robbing, and you're courting her in rags under a false name while you gather a noose for that steward, and she doesn't know you're the king." "Yes. And when this breaks when you take Vane, it breaks in front of the whole town, and she learns in the same hour that the beggar she fed with her own bread is the Alpha King, and that everything you told her was a lie." He said it not cruelly but plainly, laying it out the way I had taught him to lay out a battlefield, all the ground, all the ways to die on it. "My king, she will feel that you used her. However true the bond, however true your heart, the first thing she will feel, standing in that crowd, is that the one person who saw her when she thought no one was watching her hardest of all, and hiding what he was. That is a wound you cannot plan your way around. You can only hope she's the kind that heals." I looked into the fire and I said the truest thing I know. She's the kind that heals other people. I have to trust she can be healed in turn. It's the only thing I've asked of anyone in years that I can't command. Osric put another branch on the fire. "Then let's get you your thief," he said. "Fast, before your steward decides your miller's daughter is a problem he can solve with a wagon and a dark night. I don't like that she named the king in public. Men like Vane don't forget being made small in front of a crowd. We should move before he does." "We move when I have the true book and not before," I said. "A raid without it is only a brawl. I'll have it." And I meant to. I did not yet know that before I got near that book, I would have to stand close enough to the thief to feel his breath and let him look me in the eye and hope that a lifetime of reading kings had not taught him how to read one wearing rags. The thief came down to the mill himself 3 days later, and I served him flour, and it was the strangest hour of the whole strange fortnight, because for the length of it I stood close enough to Steward Vane to kill him with a thought and had to bow instead. He came, I understood at once, because of me. A careful man in a town he is quietly robbing keeps his ear to the ground, and word had reached him, as I had half wanted it to and half feared, that there was a stranger at the mill, a drifter called Call, who asked more questions than a drifter should and had a way of counting the grain wagons in and out of the granary with his lips moving. To Vane, that was a thread out of place, and men like Vane cannot bear a thread out of place. They must pull it and see what unravels. So he came down the hill with 4 of his green-liveried men and his own smooth self, on the excuse of inspecting the ration and the mill's tally, and the real purpose in his eyes the moment he arrived, which was to look at the stranger. I had my choice to make in the half-breath before he saw me, and I made it the way I had made every choice in that town. I stayed Call wholly down to the bone. I made myself smaller. I let the intelligence go out of my face and left only the dull, watchful patience of a man who has been hungry a long time and expects nothing good from lords. I have played the king so long I had forgotten I could play anything else. I found, standing in that yard, that a fortnight of it had made the beggar almost real, and I leaned on that. When Vane's eye found me, and it did at once, sorting the yard for the thread it had come to pull, I gave him the flat, tired, harmless nod I had given the whole town on my first day, and I picked up a flour sack and bent under it and became furniture. He was not an ugly man to look at, which surprised me. I had built him ugly in my mind from the shape of his crimes, and the reality was a trim, gray, soft-spoken man of middle years with clean hands and a pleasant, reasonable voice, the kind of man who is believed because he never raises it. That is the true face of the thing that starves a town, not a snarling villain, but a reasonable man with clean hands and a good ledger, who has decided quietly, reasonably, that some people's bread is better spent as is silver. I hated him more for the pleasantness than I could have hated any snarl. "You," he said to me pleasantly, while old Aldous stood by wringing his floured hands, terrified of the steward as any poor man is terrified of the power that can ration his bread. "The traveler." "Call, is it? They tell me you've a great interest in grain for a man who owns none." "A hungry man's interested in grain, lord," I said low to his boots. "No offense in it." "None taken, hunger's natural." He watched me. I felt the watching the way you feel a blade laid flat against your skin, not cutting yet, only measuring. "But they tell me your interest runs to the wagons. How many come down, how many go up? That's not a hungry man's interest call. A hungry man watches the flour. You watch the accounting. Now why would a drifter do that? Here was the edge of it. A lie too smooth would ring false from a beggar. A lie too clumsy would not satisfy a clever man. So I gave him a true thing, cut small, the way I had learned to give a low and true things in smaller clothes. Because I was a granary hand once, Lord, I said, down south before the roads took me. Countin' wagons is the one trade I had. A man watches what he knows how to watch. It's habit, not mischief. I count 'em the way a smith looks at every gate's hinges, means nothing by it. I let a little fear into my voice, the fear a poor man ought to have, standing questioned by the steward. If it's given offense, I'll keep my eyes down. I want no trouble. I want work and a floor. That's the whole of me, Lord, I swear it. It was a good lie because it was mostly true. I had, in a sense, spent my life counting what came in and went out of granaries. Only the granaries were a kingdom's, and because it gave him a reason for the thread that did not lead anywhere he needed to follow. I watched him weigh it. I watched the clever gray mind turn it over, looking for the false note, and I stood under his flour sack and kept my breathing slow and my wolf chained so deep that not a flicker of him reached my eyes, and I thought with a cold, private amusement that steadied me. He is deciding whether to be afraid of me, and he has no idea at all, that the drifter he is deciding about could have his whole scheme in irons by nightfall. There is a strange strength in that. To be underestimated completely, by a man who prides himself on missing nothing, is a kind of armor no smith can forge. A granary hand, he said at last, and I heard him set the thread down, not convinced exactly but unable to find the unraveling, which for my purpose was as good as convinced. Well, you'll find no work of that kind here, Call. The granary's the king's business and closed to strangers. You do well to remember that. Curiosity's a luxury in a lean year. It can be mistaken for other things. He let that sit, a threat pleasantly delivered, the only kind he made. A wise traveler counts his own steps and no one else's wagons and moves along before the frost sets in for good. This is a quiet town. I like it quiet. Do you understand me? I understand you, Lord, I said, and bowed under the sack, and I did understand him better than he could dream. I understood that I had frightened him just enough to be marked and not enough to be caught, that he had come to pull a thread and gone away unsatisfied, and that an unsatisfied clever man is a dangerous thing, because he does not forget and he does not stop pulling. He only waits for a better grip. I had bought myself time and spent some safety to do it. It was a fair trade. But I marked, as he turned to go, the way his pleasant gray eyes went once, briefly, to Eloan where she stood in the mill door watching, the loud girl, the one who had named the king over his theft in the low lanes, and lingered on her a half-beat too long, the way his men's eyes had lingered, measuring, and I understood that I had drawn his attention onto the mill exactly where I least wanted it drawn, and that if he could not find the thread in the stranger, he might reach instead for the thread he already knew, the miller's outspoken daughter, and the miller whose grain touched everything. I had wanted to gauge the thief up close. I had, and the cost of it was that I had taught a careful man to look harder at the very house that held my heart. When he and his green men went back up the hill, I stood in the yard with the taste of the encounter still in my mouth, the nearness of him, the pleasant voice, the clean hands, and I knew two things with a cold certainty. The first was that I had to get that book fast, faster than I had planned, because Vane was pulling threads now, and it was only a matter of days before one of them led somewhere true. The second was that when he could not solve the puzzle of the stranger, he would solve the puzzle he could, and the puzzle he could solve had a name, and the name was Aldous, and I had just, by my own cleverness, helped point him at it. Eloan came and stood by me when they were gone. She had watched the whole of it from the door, and she was no fool, and she said quietly, "He came down here for you, Call. Not the ration. You, what did you say to him?" "That I'm nobody," I said. "A granary hand with a bad habit of counting." He half believed it. "And the other half?" I looked at her and I wanted so badly to tell her the whole of it in that moment that my chest ached with the holding of it. "The other half," I said, "is why we have to be careful now, all of us. Your father especially. Keep your voice down in the lanes a while, Eloan, please, for me, just a while." She heard the fear in it, not a beggar's fear, a soldier's, and I saw her file it away with all the other things about me that did not add up, and she said, "Soon, you said. You keep saying soon." And I said soon, and I meant it. And I did not know that Vane, up the hill, was already deciding that soon was too long to wait, and that a careful man does not pull the thread he cannot grip when there is another, easier thread lying right there in a mill, with flour on its hands and a fierce loud daughter, ready to be pulled hard enough to unravel a whole town's attention away from a granary and a barge and a book. With Osric in the woods and a plan taking shape, the work went faster and colder. He watched the river landing while I worked the town. Within 3 days, we had confirmed what I had only pieced together. A barge, low and long and river-worn, moored below the falls under a tarpaulin and a schedule to it. It would take on cargo and slip downstream to the Caro border on the next dark of the moon, when there would be no light on the water to betray it. Osric counted the guards, marked the moorings, learned the bargemaster's habits. And I bent all my patience on the one thing that could turn all of this from a raid into a reckoning. The true ledger, the honest book of a dishonest man, hidden somewhere in the steward's hall at the top of the town beside the guarded granary. I could not get into that hall as call, but I could learn its shape, and I did, from the people who cleaned it and carried in its firewood and emptied its slops. The invisible servants a proud man never truly sees, who see everything. There was a strong room off the steward's private study, they said, an iron-doored room where Vane kept his accounts and let no servant enter, that he swept clean himself. A man does not sweep his own strong room unless it holds something he cannot let another hand touch. The true book was there. I was nearly certain of it, and I began slowly to build the way in which servant, which knight, which key. But I want to tell you about the days as much as the nights, because it was in the days that the deepest thing kept happening, and because I have never been able to think of that time only as the hunt. Eloin and I had become, by then, something the town had a name for before we did. I heard it in the low lanes, the miller's call, they called me, half-teasing, the way a town speaks of a courtship it approves of, and I did nothing to correct it because I could not have borne to. We worked side by side. We ate our thin meals in her father's kitchen, old Aldous watching me across the table with his careful, tired eyes, having decided, I think, that whatever I was not a danger to his daughter, and being wrong about that in the largest possible way and right about it in the only way that mattered. And in the evenings, when the mill was banked, we walked her rounds together now, the two of us in a basket, and I carried the basket, and she taught me the low lanes door by door, who was proud, who was sick, who had a new baby that the mother could not feed, who cursed and who wept and who pretended not to be home. She let me be part of the one thing she had that was wholly hers, her secret mercy, and she did not know she was letting a king relearn his own kingdom from the bottom up. One night, walking back with the basket empty, she asked me who I was. Not sharply, not with suspicion. She asked the way she did everything, gently giving me room. "You're not what you say you are, Call," she said, watching the frozen lane and not my face, a kindness. "I've known it since the first day. You thank a woman for bread as if she'd given you a kingdom. You carry yourself like a man used to being obeyed, and then you remember to stoop. You know things a drifter shouldn't, how much grain a wagon holds, what a barge draws, the name of a border pack most folk here have never heard. You watch that granary like it's yours." She was quiet a moment. "I don't ask because I want to catch you out. I ask because I've told you my whole self in the dark at every door in this town, and I'd like to know if the man I've been telling it to is real or if I've been talking to a mask. That's all. I can bear a lot. I don't think I can bear a mask." I could not answer her. God knows I wanted to. I stood in that cold lane with the empty basket, and the woman I loved asking me, gently, for the one thing I could not give her yet without ruining everything I had come to save. And I understood in my body what Osric had warned me of in words, that when this broke, she would remember this moment, this exact lane, this exact asking, and she would know that I had stood here and chosen the mission over the truth of me, chosen it while she stood open-handed as she had never been open-handed to anyone. I chose it anyway. I had to. But I gave her what I could, which was the truth wearing smaller clothes. "You're not talking to a mask," I said, and my voice was not Call's, and I let it not be just this once. "I swear that to you. Everything I've felt at those doors, every word I've said to you that wasn't about where I've come from, that's real. There are things about me I can't tell you yet, not because they'd frighten you, because telling them now could cost lives, and I won't buy my own comfort with other people's danger, and I think alone of anyone alive, you'd understand a person who won't do that." I stopped. I looked at her. "Ask me again soon. I'm going to be able to answer soon. And when I do, I'm going to ask you to be as brave in the hearing of it as you've been in everything else, because it's going to be hard, and because I'd rather you knew everything about me than anyone alive." She looked at me for a long moment in the dark, and then she said, "All right," just that, "all right." "Soon then?" And she took my arm the way she never had before, and we walked the rest of the way to the mill in a silence that was not empty, and at the door she looked up at me, and I thought she might, and my whole wolf went still and yearning, and then she only touched my face once with her cold, flowered hand the way she had touched it that first day, and went inside. And I stood in the yard with my face burning where her hand had been, and I thought, soon. Let it be soon. Let me get this thief, so I can stop being a thief myself of the truth she's owed. The next morning, Osric found the crack we needed, and everything began to move fast. He had befriended in his patient soldier's way one of the bargemen down at the landing, a frightened man, in over his head, who had begun to understand exactly what cargo he was carrying and to whom, and to be afraid of hanging for another man's crime. From this man, Osric had a name and a date and one thing more, that Vane did not trust the caro buyers and kept a true reckoning of every load against the day they tried to cheat him, and that this reckoning was written in a green-bound book that Vane carried on his own person when he went down to oversee a loading, and locked in the strong room otherwise. The book, named, described, located. And Vane, the bargeman said, would go down to the landing himself on the dark of the moon, 3 nights hence, to see the great final load away before the border froze. And he would have the green book on him, out of the strong room, out in the open, for the only night in the season it would ever be within reach of a man who could take it. 3 nights, the dark of the moon, everything we needed in one place on one night. I sent word to Osric to ready what loyal wolves he could quietly summon to the woods, and I began to plan the taking of that book, and that barge, and that steward all in one clean stroke. And that same day, Vane made his own move, and he made it not at the barge and not at the granary, but at the mill, and I understood, too late, that a clever criminal watching the same board I was watching had seen the same danger I had, a public voice that had named the king over his theft, and had decided to remove it before it could be raised in front of anyone who counted. He did not come for a Lowen. That would have made a martyr of her, and Vane was too clever for martyrs. He came for her father. They came at midday with a paper and a purpose, and they took Aldous the miller in front of the whole town, and the charge they read out was the cruelest lie a clever man could have chosen, that the miller of Larkalow had been hoarding and stealing the pack's grain, holding back the king's requisitioned stores, and selling them in secret against the ration, that the shortage in the town was the miller's doing, the miller's greed, the miller's crime. I understood the shape of it the instant I heard it, and it was so ugly and so clever that I felt my wolf go silent with a kind of respect for the evil of it. Vane needed a thief. Not because anyone doubted grain was vanishing, everyone knew grain was vanishing, but because the town had begun, thanks to a miller's daughter with a carrying voice, to look uphill for the thief, toward the granary, toward the steward, toward the king's name laid over the robbery. Vane needed to turn the town's eyes back downhill. He needed a face for the famine that was not his own. And who better than the miller, the man whose hands touched every grain of the town's bread, whose mill was the one place all the grain passed through, whose daughter had made herself loud? Arrest the miller for the very crime you are committing, and you accomplish 3 things at a stroke. You give the hungry a villain to hate who is not you. You silence the daughter, because a woman with her father in a cell and a rope in his future does not make speeches in torchlit lanes. She begs. And you cover your own last great theft, 3 nights hence, behind a courtroom's noise, because a town watching a hanging is not a town watching a river. It was perfect, and it very nearly worked, and the thing that made it nearly work was the same thing that made everything about that time so hard, that I could not simply stop it because I was still Call, and a beggar cannot open an iron door. I stood in the mill yard and watched them take Aldous, that big stooped gray man, bewildered, flour still on his hands, saying over and over that there was some mistake, that he'd never held back a grain in his life, which was the plain truth, and no truth has ever mattered less to the men holding the paper. I watched them chain his floured hands, and I watched Alowen. She did not fall apart. I will remember to the end of my life how she did not fall apart. She went white, and then she went very still, and then she moved to her father and put her hands over his chained hands and said to him, low and fierce, "I will get you out. Do you hear me? Whatever it takes. I will get you out, and this will be undone, and everyone will know it was a lie." And she meant it, every syllable, and Aldous looked at his fierce, thin daughter, and I saw the fear in him was not for himself but for her, for what she would do, for how far she would go, for the men who were watching her say it. Then they took him up the hill to the steward's cells, and the crowd that Vane needed to turn was already half-turned, already muttering, "The miller, it was the miller all along," because a frightened, hungry town wants nothing so much as a face for its suffering, and will take the first one it is handed. And Aloan turned to me, to call. The ragged drifter, the man with no power in the world, the one soul in that yard she trusted wholly. She took my arms and she looked up at me and she said, "Help me. I don't care what you are or aren't. You know things. You said soon, call, it has to be now, it has to be now, help me get my father out." Do you understand what she was asking, and of whom? She was asking a beggar to storm a lord's cells. She was asking the impossible of the one person she believed loved her, because love, she believed, was all the power he had. She did not know she was standing with her hands on the arms of the Alpha King, whose single spoken word could have emptied that cell and hung that steward from the granary door by sundown. Every particle of me wanted to say it. I am the king. Your father will sleep in his own bed tonight, and Vane will sleep in irons. Watch me. The words were in my mouth. My wolf was howling for me to say them, to end her fear, to be for her in that moment the thing I actually was. And I did not say them. God help me, I did not say them, and I will carry the look on her face while I did not say them for the rest of my life. Because I thought coldly, correctly, hatefully, that if I revealed myself now in the mill yard at midday, 2 days before the dark of the moon, then Vane would know within the hour that the king was in his town. And Vane, thus warned, would do the only sane thing a cornered, clever thief can do. He would not sail his barge, he would burn his true ledger, he would perhaps even quietly release the miller with apologies to muddy the water, and he would vanish across the border to his Caro buyers with a fortune in stolen grain gold, and I would have him for nothing. Worse, far worse, I thought of the barge. If Vane bolted, that final great load of the town's grain went with him, downstream, gone, and with it the last stores that stood between this town and true starvation come spring. Revealing myself to save one man tonight might cost the town its bread, and let the thief walk free to rob some other people's children in some other place. The king and me weighed one miller's 2 days in a cell against a whole town's spring, and the arithmetic was pitiless and clear. And it was the exact arithmetic Aloan herself had taught me to be ashamed of, to look at a suffering face and calculate. And I did the calculation, and I chose the town, and I hated myself with a completeness I had not known was in me. 2 days, I said to her, and my voice broke on it, and I did not care that it broke. Aloan, I swear to you on everything I am, and there is more of me than you know, your father will not hang. He will not be harmed. In 2 days this ends, and it ends with him free and the true thief in irons and the whole town knowing your father was innocent. 2 days. I am asking you to trust me for 2 days, when I have given you no reason but my face, and given you 100 reasons to doubt it. It's the largest thing I've ever asked anyone, and I'm asking it of the bravest person I've ever known. She stared at me, and I watched her weigh a beggar's impossible promise against her father in a cell, watched the fear and the fury and the trust war in her thin white face. 2 days, she said at last, and it came out of her like something torn. 2 days, Call, and if you're lying to me, if this is a mask after all, then I don't know how I'll live, because I'll have let my father sit in a cell on the word of a man who wasn't real. She stepped back from me, and the stepping back was the worst part. Don't make me have let him sit there for a lie. Then she went up the hill after her father, to beg at the cell door for the right to bring him bread. And I stood in the empty yard with 2 days in front of me and my whole heart walking away up the hill. And I swore to the cold sky that I would rather die than let her have trusted a lie. I did not know that Aloan had made her own plan, and that she did not intend to spend those 2 days waiting. She let me believe she was waiting. That was the one deception Aloan ever practiced on me, and she practiced it out of love and out of a courage that terrified me, and I did not see it until it was nearly too late. For a day and a night she played the part of the grieving daughter perfectly, because she was the grieving daughter and did not have to play it much. She carried bread up the hill to her father's cell. She wept where the guards could see her weep. She was small and harmless and beaten-looking, and Vane's men, watching her as they had been told to, reported no doubt that the loud girl had been broken by her father's arrest exactly as their master had intended, and relaxed their watching. And all the while, behind that broken face, Aloan was doing precisely what I was doing, and for the same reason, and she was doing it alone. She had reasoned it out the way she reasoned out everything. Her father was accused of stealing grain. The way to free him was not to beg. Begging moved no one who had built the lie on purpose, but to prove the lie a lie, and the only proof that could do that was proof of who the real thief was. And where would such proof be? Up the hill, in the steward's hall, behind the iron door. She did not know about the green book by name as I did, But she knew, the way she knew people, that a man who steals must keep count of what he steals, and that the count would be somewhere in that hall, and that if she could lay her hands on it and carry it to the pack moot. For there was a moot, a gathering of the region's elder wolves, due within the fortnight. Then she could set her father's innocence and the steward's guilt before the one authority Vane could not simply buy in a single town. It was the same plan I had, built from less knowledge, aimed at the same door, and she meant to walk through that door herself, in the dark, alone, because the only man who might have helped her had asked her to wait, and she no longer entirely believed he could do anything at all. I found out because I could not sleep and went up the hill in the small hours of that second night, the night before the dark of the moon, the night before everything, to look once more at the ground I meant to fight on. And I saw, in the starless dark, a slight figure in a gray shawl going up the frozen slope toward the steward's hall, keeping to the shadow of the wall the way I had taught her nothing, and she had learned everything. And my heart stopped in my chest because I knew that walk. I would know that walk in any darkness in any world. And I understood in one sick instant exactly what she was doing and exactly how it would end if I did not stop it. I went after her. I could not call out. A shout in that silence would have brought the guards down on us both. I moved the way my kind can move, fast and silent, and I caught her at the very foot of the hall's outer stair in the black shadow beside a buttress, and I put my hand over her mouth before she could cry out and my arm around her to hold her still, and I felt her go rigid with terror and then an instant later feel the shape of me, know the shape of me, and go still in a different way. I took my hand from her mouth. "You're going to get yourself killed," I breathed into her ear, "and I cannot let you, I cannot, do you hear me?" She turned in my arms. We were pressed together in the dark against cold stone, closer than we had ever been, her heart going like a bird's against my chest. And even now, even here, she was not begging and she was not weak. "Then help me," she breathed back, fierce, "or let me go, but don't stand in the dark and stop me and offer nothing, call, because I will not sit in that mill and weep while my father waits to hang on a lie. There's proof in that hall. I know there is. A man like Vane counts his sins. I'm going to find where he keeps the count, and I'm going to carry it to the moot, and I'm going to hang him with it, and I would rather die on that stair tonight than live having not tried. So which is it? Help me or let me go." And I made the second hardest decision of that whole hard time, and I think, looking back, that it was the first genuinely right one I had made since I rode into Larkalow, though it very nearly killed us both. I did not reveal myself even then, even there, with her heart against mine and her courage shaming me, because the guards were 40 feet away and Vane slept in that hall, and a whispered confession in the dark could still undo everything. But I stopped trying to send her home. I could see, holding her, that home was not a place she would stay. So I did the only thing left that was neither betrayal nor abandonment. I chose to go with her. "Not tonight," I breathed. "Listen to me and then decide if I'm real. Not tonight, because tonight the man you're hunting sleeps 40 feet from that door, and the thing you're looking for isn't in that hall tonight. It's on his person. And tomorrow night he carries it down to the river to load the last stolen grain onto a barge bound for the border. Tomorrow night at the landing, the proof and the thief and the grain are all in one place in the dark, away from these walls and these guards. That is where this ends. I have known it for days. I have friends." I felt her startle at the word, "more than you know, ready to move." "I did not tell you because I could not, and I was wrong, and I'm telling you now in the dark on this stair with everything I have to lose in my arms. Come with me tomorrow night and help me take him where he's weak instead of where he's strong, and we free your father with the whole truth instead of a stolen page. That's real, Eloan. That's the truest thing I've told you. Now decide." She was silent so long I could hear the guards' low voices around the corner of the hall. Then she said, "Friends." "What friends does a drifter have, ready to move?" "The kind I'll show you tomorrow night," I said. "The kind that answer the question you've been asking me since the first day. I promised you'd know everything soon, and I meant it, and soon is tomorrow. On the river. I swear it." I felt her decide. I felt it go through her whole body, the letting go of one plan and the terrible taking up of a stranger's, the choice to trust the mask one more time on the strength of nothing but a voice in the dark. "Tomorrow night," she breathed, "on the river. And call if there's no friends, if there's no barge, if you've spun me a story to keep me quiet one more day while my father." "Then hang me beside him," I said, "for I'll have earned it." And something in that, the flat certainty of it, reached her where softer words had not, and she nodded against my chest, and we went back down that hill together in the dark, two shadows, and I took her to the mill and left her at the door, and neither of us slept. The next day was the longest of my life, and I spent it making a battle. Osric had gathered what I asked for. In the woods above the landing, a half-day back, 7 wolves waited, not an army, but 7 of my own sworn shields, quiet men who had answered the king's silent call and asked no questions, and who did not know yet whether they had come to a war or a hunt. 7 and Osric and me, against Vane's guard at the landing, which the frightened bargeman had counted at a dozen, plus the steward and his household men. The numbers were poor, but numbers are not the whole of a fight, and my 7 were the finest my hall could field, and we would come out of the dark on men who thought themselves safe. More than that, I did not intend, if I could help it, to make it a slaughter. I wanted Vane taken alive with the green book in his hand in front of witnesses, because a dead thief proves nothing and a living one confesses. I wanted the reckoning to be seen. And I wanted, God help me, one thing more that had nothing to do with kingcraft. I wanted Aloin to be there when the mask came off, not to learn it from a herald's cry after the fact. To see it. To see me become what I was in the doing of the thing that saved her father, so that whatever else she felt, she would at least have seen with her own eyes that the beggar who loved her and the king who freed her were the same man, and that the same hands did both. That was my plan. It was a good plan. And like every good plan, it survived exactly until the moment the enemy was given a vote. Because Vane, that clever, ugly man, had a plan of his own, and his plan was better than mine in the one way that mattered, which was that he had thought about Aloin too. Here is where I must tell the darkest part, and I tell it plainly, because I have never dressed it up even to myself. The dark of the moon came, and with it the cold, clear plan, and it went wrong before we ever reached the river. Vane had not survived as long as he had by being careless with loud girls. He had watched Aloin the day her father was taken, and he had not been fooled, or not fully, by the broken face she showed his men. Some instinct in him, the instinct that keeps his kind alive, the animal wariness of the guilty, had marked her as unfinished business, a danger merely postponed, and he had decided that on the very night of his great final theft he would not leave that danger loose behind him in the town. He did not mean to harm her. I believe that, and it matters, because it is the reason things fell the way they did. He meant only to hold her, quietly, briefly, out of the way, for the one night it took to see the barge gone and himself across the border, after which a miller's daughter's word against a vanished steward would be a small thing, and a hanged miller a closed book. He sent men to the mill at dusk to take her. And Aloin, who had promised me she would wait for me to come for her at full dark, who had meant to keep that promise, was not at the mill when they came, because she had gone up the hill one last time with bread for her father, a daughter's small, brave, ordinary act. And the steward's men, finding her already inside the walls of the hall, simply closed the doors and kept her there. So that when I came for her at full dark, ready to bring her down to the river to see me become myself, I came to an empty mill and a cold hearth and old Aldous' chained absence and no Aloin anywhere, and the frozen certainty came down on me that Vane had her, and that everything had gone wrong in the one direction I had not armored against. I will not pretend I was a king in that hour. For a space of minutes I was only a wolf who could not find his mate, and it was the worst thing I have ever felt, worse than my father's death, worse than any wound, a blind white terror that nearly sent me straight up that hill to tear the hall apart stone by stone with the whole plan be damned. Osric found me in the yard on the edge of exactly that, and it was Osric who saved everything by grabbing me and putting his face in mine, and saying the one thing that could reach me. If you go up that hill now and become the king in that hall, the barge sails, the grain is gone, Vane goes over the water, and she is still his to bargain with. Think, where is he going tonight? The river, he was going to the river. The dark of the moon, the last great load, the green book, nothing about that had changed. And a man who has just taken a hostage he means to release does not leave her behind unguarded in a hall he is himself abandoning that same night. He takes her with him down to the landing to keep her close and quiet until the moment he steps onto the water and is gone and she no longer matters. Vane would bring Aloin to the river. He would bring her, unknowing, to the exact place where I had already massed everything I had. The thing that had gone most wrong had, by the pitiless arithmetic of it, brought the two ends of the night together at the same dark landing. It steadied me the way nothing else could have. I stopped being only a wolf. I became, again, the thing Larkalo needed me to be. And Osric and I went to the river ahead of the steward, to be already in the dark when he came. The landing below the falls was a black place that night, no moon, only the cold rush of the Vero and a few shielded lanterns down at the water where the barge lay low against the stone quay, already half loaded, sacks of the town's stolen bread going down into her hold on the backs of frightened men. My 7 were in the tree line above, silent, waiting on my word. Osric was at my shoulder. And we lay in the frozen brush above the landing and watched Steward Vane come down the river road with his household guard and his lanterns, and walking small and straight and unbroken between 2 of his men, her. They had not hurt her. I made myself see that first, made my wolf see it, count her fingers, read her face in the lantern light, frightened, yes, but whole and furious, and looking about her in the dark with those quick, clever eyes as if even now, even a prisoner, she was searching for the crack in the wall. My brave, my impossible, my mate. She did not know I was 30 feet above her in the dark with 7 wolves and a king's whole wrath held on a leash of timing. She thought I understood this later, and it is the part that still cuts. She thought I had failed her. She thought Call had spun her a story after all, that there were no friends and no barge plan, that she had trusted a mask one last time and it had come to nothing, and that she was going to die on a cold quay for the crime of feeding the hungry and loving a liar. She stood in the lantern light believing that, and she did not weep, and she did not beg, and I have never in my life been so proud of anyone or so close to breaking my own plan to pieces to reach them. I lay in the frozen brush with my hand pressed flat to the earth to keep myself from moving too soon, and I made myself study her the way I would study any ground I meant to fight over, because study was the only thing that kept the wolf in me from ruin. She had her chin up. She had found, even bound between 2 guards on a cold quay in the dark, the one small dignity left to her, which was to refuse to give Vane the fear he wanted, and she wore it like the gray shawl she always wore, plain and unbreakable. And I thought, watching her, that I had spent my whole life among people who bowed to power and flattered it and feared it, and that not one of them had ever taught me a fraction of what this one thin, unbowed woman had taught me in a fortnight. That the measure of a soul is not what it does when the powerful are watching, but what it does when it believes no one who matters is watching at all, and that by that measure alone was the richest person in my whole poor kingdom, and I had very nearly ridden past her. Vane brought her to the edge of the quay, near the barge, where the loading was nearly done. And there in the lantern light, believing himself alone with his men and his grain and his one loose thread, that clever, ugly, careful man made the single mistake that undid him, the mistake I had been praying for and could not have compelled. He talked. He could not help it. He had been so clever for so long in silence, alone with the size of his own scheme, and here at the end was a captive audience. A girl who understood exactly what he had done and could do nothing about it, the perfect listener for a proud man's triumph. He drew out the green book there in the light, and he tapped it, and he told her. He told her all of it, the way such men always eventually tell someone, because a secret cleverness unwitnessed is only half a pleasure. The requisitions in the king's name, the ration to keep the town weak, the barges to the Carrow border, her father chosen for the fall precisely because the mill was the perfect place to hang the theft and her own loud mouth the perfect thing to silence. The famine, he said, was not his crime. The famine was his opportunity, and only a fool wastes an opportunity, and the king in his hall would never know, because the king saw only ledgers and ledgers say what the man who writes them wants them to say. He held the green book up in the lantern light, and he named every crime in it aloud, to prove to a helpless girl how thoroughly he had won. And I gave the word. We came out of the dark and the tree line all at once, 8 wolves down a black slope onto men who thought themselves alone with a beaten town's plunder. And the fight, such as it was over almost before it began. I want to be honest about it, because the songs will make it grander than it was, and I would rather you had the truth. It was not a battle. It was a landslide. My 7 and Osric were the finest fighters in the Grey Reach, wolves who had held the northern passes against real war, and they fell on Vane's tired household guard out of a dark those men did not know held anything, and it was not close. I heard steel and shouting and the flat, wet sounds of men going down, and I paid it almost no mind, because I was not fighting the guard. I had gone through the whole tangle of it like water finding the low place, straight for the 2 things that mattered, the man and the girl. And I reached them at the edge of the quay with the green book still in Vane's raised hand. He was quick, I will give him that. He saw his guard falling, and he understood in an instant that he was undone, and a lesser criminal would have run for the barge or the book. But Vane, clever to the last, went for the only thing that could still buy him passage off that quay alive. He seized Alowan. He got an arm across her and put a knife to her throat, and he backed toward the barge with her in front of him. And he screamed into the dark for the raiders to hold, or the girl died. And every wolf on that quay froze, because I had told them what she was to me, and because the sight of that thin, brave woman with a blade at her throat stopped the whole avalanche in its tracks. I stopped too, 3 feet away, close enough to see the pulse in her throat above the knife, close enough to see her eyes find me in the dark, find Call, the ragged stranger, come out of the night with fighting men at his back, and go wide with a confusion she had no time to resolve. And Vane, breathing hard, holding her, looked at me, at the beggar he had never once noticed in all his careful watching of the town, the miller's Call, a nobody in a dead man's cloak, and he laughed, a high, thin, frightened laugh, and he said, "And who are you?" "Some hedge knight," the girl betted. "You've made a mess of my guard, tramp, I'll grant you, but you've won nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing, because I hold the only thing on this key you want. And you'll open a road for me off this river, or I'll open her throat. And then where's your victory, beggar? Where's your—" "Osric," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. In the sudden silence of that key, my shield captain's answer came clear and formal and terrible, the words he had waited days in a cold wood to be allowed to say. And he sank to one knee on the frozen stone with his fist over his heart and his head bowed. And every one of my 7 wolves went down with him in the same instant, 8 men kneeling in the lantern light with their eyes on me. And Osric said, in a voice pitched to carry the length of the river, "My king." The word went across the quay like a change in the weather. I saw Vane's face come apart. I saw the whole clever machine of his mind seize and shatter as he looked from his kneeling captives to the ragged man 3 feet in front of him, and understood all at once, too late, what had walked into his town and worked at the mill and carried the miller's daughter's basket through the low lanes for a fortnight. I let the beggar's stoop go out of my shoulders. I let my wolf come up into my eyes at last, the king's wolf, the one I had held down under ash and rags for 200 cold miles and a lifetime of days. And I saw Vane see it, saw the exact moment the man knew, and I said quietly to the thief who had starved my people in my own name, "You asked who I am. I am the king you have been robbing. I am the need you invoked over every widow's stolen corn. I rode into my own hungry land dressed as one of the poor you were bleeding, to find the man doing it, and I found him, and I have stood beside him in the dark for a fortnight learning the full weight of what he did. And I have every word of it, Steward Vane, because you were good enough just now to speak your whole account aloud to the one witness you thought could never repeat it. I let that land. She can repeat it. So can I, so can 8 of the finest wolves in the reach, kneeling here in the light, who heard your king name you thief. It is over. The barge does not sail. The grain goes back to the town you stole it from. And you will not open her throat, because the instant that blade so much as grazes her, there is no border wide enough and no water deep enough in all the world to put between us, and you know it now, looking at me. You know exactly what I am. So take the knife from my mate's throat and live to face a moot and a law, or press it, and find out what a wolf king does to the man who would harm the woman who fed his hungry with her own bread. Choose, but choose knowing I am not a beggar you can bargain with. I am the last thing you will ever bargain with, if you are wise enough to bargain at all. I have faced down warlords across battle lines. I have never watched a man's will break as completely as Vane's broke on that key. The knife hand shook. The high, thin laugh was gone. Whatever calculus of escape he had been running died in him as he stared into the king's eyes 3 feet from his own, and understood that he had not, after all, been the cleverest man in Larkalow, that the ragged nobody had been the king the whole time, that every secret cruelty he had worked in my name had been worked, as it happened, within arm's reach of me. The knife came away from her throat. His arm loosened. And Aloan, who had not once in all of it screamed or wept or begged, chose that exact half-instant of his weakening to do the last brave, clever thing of that long night. She drove her thin, sharp elbow back into him with everything her starved body had, and twisted and broke free, and Osric was up off his knee and across the stone before the steward could recover, and it was done. Vane was down and held. The knife spun away into the black river. The green book kicked loose across the quay to lie in the lantern light where anyone could read it. And Aloan stumbled 2 steps forward out of her captor's ruined grip and stood, free, gasping, staring at me, at the king, at the beggar, at the impossible single man who was both, while 8 wolves knelt around us, and the town's grain sat safe in the belly of a barge that would never leave. And I understood that the hardest part of the whole night was not the fight, and was not the reckoning, and was still, even now, in front of me. because she was looking at me the way you look at a stranger wearing a beloved's face. And the warmth in my chest, the warmth that had started with a heel of broken bread and never once gone out, reached across the 3 feet of frozen stone between us and found nothing yet to answer it, because she did not know, in that reeling moment, whether the man who loved her had ever been real at all. I did not go to her. That was the hardest restraint of all the restraints of that long fortnight, and I want to explain it, because it would have been the natural thing to cross those 3 feet and take her in my arms, and it would have been wrong. She had just learned, in the space of a single sentence spoken by a kneeling soldier, that the ragged stranger she had fed and trusted and half-loved was the alpha king of the Grey Reach. She had learned it while a knife was at her throat. She had learned that every hour we had spent side by side at the mill, every door in the low lanes she had shown me, every secret of her heart she had told me in the dark, believing she spoke to a fellow poor soul with nothing. All of it, she now knew, had been spoken to the most powerful man in the realm, wearing a face that was not his. To cross those 3 feet and hold her before she had been given room to feel that would have been to use my power on her one more time, to close a wound with force before she had been allowed to bleed. And I had sworn to myself, watching her walk up that hill with her father chained, that whatever else I did, I would not take from Aloan the one thing I had watched her give and give and give to a whole town. Choice, freely offered, never compelled. So I knelt. I went down onto the frozen stone of the quay in my beggar's rags in front of the miller's daughter, the way my own wolves had knelt to me, and I heard the whole landing go still with the wrongness and the rightness of it. A king on his knees before a girl in a gray shawl, and I looked up at her, and I said the truest and plainest words I had. Everything I told you about the world was a lie, I said. My name, my road, what I was. I let you believe I was a poor man because I could not hunt the thief who was starving your town any other way, and because a king who reveals himself learns nothing, and because I was a coward about the one part of it that was never strategy at all. But everything I told you about myself, every word I said to you at those doors, everything I felt carrying that basket through the dark, the man who listened to you talk about the bread and the child and being fixed by the famine, that was not a lie, Aloan. That was the truest I have been with anyone in 20 years of wearing a crown. The rags were false. The man in them was not. I know you have no reason to believe me. I have given you a fortnight of reasons to believe the opposite. So I am not going to ask you to believe me tonight. I'm only going to kneel here and tell you it is true, and then I am going to stand up and be the king this town needs for the next hour and free your father and set right what was done. And you are going to have all the time in the world, a lifetime if you need it, to decide whether the man you knew was real. I will not rush you. I will never again take one single thing from you that you do not freely give. That is the only promise I have left that I have not already broken, and I mean to keep it if it costs me everything I want. She looked down at me kneeling there, and her face, her thin, brave, unbeautiful, beloved face, did a thing I will remember always. It broke, and it did not break toward me, and it did not break away from me. It simply broke open, all the terror and the fury and the fortnight of it coming up at once, and she said in a voice with no floor to it, "You let me beg you. In the yard, when they took my father. You let me put my hands on your arms and beg a beggar to save him, and you could have said one word, and he'd have slept in his bed that night." Her voice cracked. Do you know what that did to me? To beg the only person I trusted, and have him give me 2 days of nothing, and think he was helpless, think we were both helpless, when all the time. I know, I said. I know exactly what it did to you. I watched it do it. And I chose the town's grain over your 2 days of peace, the way you taught me a good ruler must never do and must sometimes do. And I have hated myself for it in every hour since. And I would, God forgive me, Aloan, I would do it again, because if I had spoken that word in the yard, Vane would have bolted with this barge and the grain and the town's whole spring. And there are children in your low lanes who will eat now because I let you suffer for 2 days. I am not asking you to forgive that. I am telling you the truth of it, which is the only thing I have left to give you that isn't power. It was the cruelest thing I have ever done, and it was in service of the kindest thing I know how to do, and both of those are true at once, and that is what it is to wear this crown, and I would give it up tomorrow if it would give you back those 2 days. And I cannot, so here I am on my knees in the cold telling you I am sorry in the only currency that isn't force. She wept then, not softly. She stood on that quay with a dead man's barge behind her and 8 kneeling wolves around her, and she wept the way people weep when a thing is finally over, great and shaking, and I stayed on my knees and did not touch her and let her weep, and it was the hardest kindness I have ever done. And when it eased, when she scrubbed her face with the back of her flowered wrist the way she always had, and drew a long, broken breath, she said the thing that told me she was who I had always known she was. "My father," she said. "You said you'd free my father. Do that first. Whatever's between you and me, do that first. There's a man in a cell who hasn't slept in 4 days thinking he's going to hang for a crime he didn't do, and his freedom shouldn't wait on my feelings. Go and be the king. Her voice steadied. "I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. But go and get my father and give this town back its bread, and then we can." She stopped and looked at me kneeling, and something moved behind the grief in her eyes that was not forgiveness yet, but was the ground forgiveness could grow in. "Then we'll talk. Get up. Kings shouldn't kneel on cold stone. It frightens people." I got up, and I have knelt to no one since and will kneel to no one again, but I have never once regretted kneeling to her, because it was the last thing I did as Call and the first honest thing I did as myself in front of her. And it was, though I did not know it then, the exact thing that let her begin to believe the two men were one. The rest of that night was a king's work, and I did it with her standing near, not beside me yet, but near, watching, which was its own kind of trial and its own kind of hope. I had the green book taken up and read aloud on the key by the light of Vane's own lanterns. Every stolen load, every requisition faked in my name, every silver mark of Caro grain gold, so that not only my wolves but the frightened bargemen and the wagoners heard the whole account from the thief's own careful hand and could carry it back to the town by morning. I had Vane bound but unharmed. I will speak of his reckoning, and it is not what my wolf wanted, and it is the part of this I am most proud of. I sent Osric with 3 wolves up the river road that same hour, before dawn, before rumor, to the steward's hall and the guarded granary, with the king's own word, to open both. And I sent word ahead of them, riding fast on Vane's own good horses, to a cell at the top of the town, where an innocent man had not slept in 4 days. I did not go to free Aldous myself. I sent Elowen. I put her on the best of the horses, and I sent 2 of my wolves to see her safe and to see that every door on that hill opened at her word, and I said, "You told your father you would get him out whatever it took. Go and be the one who does it. It was never mine to do. It was always going to be you." And she looked at me for a long moment from the horses back in the first gray of the dawn, and she did not smile. It was too soon for smiling, but something in her face eased another degree toward the ground where things could grow. And she turned the horse and rode up the hill to free her father, and I watched her go, and the warmth in my chest, the warmth that had never once gone out since a broken heel of bread in a cold mill yard, burned steady and patient and unafraid. Because I understood at last that I had not lost her. I had only, finally, given her the choice, and I would wait as long as it took for her to make it, because a thing freely given is the only thing worth having, and she of all people had taught me that. Dawn came up gray and cold over Larkalow, and by its first light the town woke to find its world turned over in the night, and the king in its midst. I did not slip away and send a herald. I had done enough hiding. I walked up into the town in the morning with my wolves around me and the crown's own authority in my bearing, still in the beggar's rags, because I would not put on finery to face the people I had lived among as one of the poor. Let them see the king in the same cloak the drifter had worn, so that no one could ever say the 2 men were different men. And the town gathered in the market square, where a widow had once been robbed of her seed corn under torchlight. And I stood on the lip of the well where Elowen had first knelt to a starving child, and I told them the truth. All of it, the famine and the theft and the disguise and the barge. I told them their miller was innocent, and I had Aldous stand beside me while I said it, free, blinking in the daylight, his flowered hands unchained, his fierce daughter's arm around him, so that the same crowd that had muttered it was the miller all along could see with their own eyes that they had been lied to, and by whom, and could carry the truth home instead of the lie. A town poisoned in public must be healed in public. I had learned that, too, in a fortnight, from watching a girl name a wrong out loud in a torchlit lane. Then I dealt with Vane, and this is the part I most want understood, because it is where my wolf and I have always disagreed, and where Elowen, without a word, decided it. My wolf wanted his throat. So did the town once the full weight of what he had done came clear. The widows, the seed corn, the children who had died in the thin winters while this well-fed man sold their bread across the border for silver. There was a mood in that square that morning that could have become a hanging, or worse, and it would have been easy, and in the old songs it is what the Wolf King does. And I stood on the well and I felt that mood rising, and I looked out over the crowd and I found Elowen's face, and she was not looking at Vane. She was looking at me. And I remembered a cold day at the mill, and a hard, sour, ungrateful man named Pell, and a thin girl saying, "Shame is just pain that hasn't found anywhere to go." And I'd rather starve than learn to look at a suffering thing and call the worst answer wisdom. And I understood that the town was watching to learn, from its king, what kind of justice this was going to be. Whether the man who had ruled them in secret through cruelty was going to be answered with cruelty. And the whole town taught, in that answering, that cruelty is simply what power does when it finally has the upper hand. So I did not hang him. I said, so the whole square could hear it, that Steward Vane would face the moot, the gathering of the region's elder wolves, the pack's own law with the green book and every witness against him, and that he would answer for every grain and every death with the full weight of that law, which meant the stripping of his name and his lands and his office, and hard labor in service of the very people he had robbed until his last breath, rebuilding what he had broken. Not death. Not the quick, clean cruelty his crimes seemed to earn and that my wolf howled for, a living reckoning in the light under the law useful to the wronged. He starved you to fatten himself, I told the square. I will not fatten your hate to lighten your grief. He will spend the rest of his life giving back in labor what he took, and every winter he draws breath he will draw it knowing the people he wronged decided he should live to make it right. That is heavier than a rope, and it leaves this town something a hanging never does. It leaves you the knowledge that when your king finally held all the power on this square, he chose the law over the blade, because that is the difference between a king and a thief, and I will not blur it, not even for a man who has earned the blade. What? The square was silent a long moment. And then from somewhere in the crowd, one voice, I think it was the widow Sarn, though I never knew for certain, said, "Aye." Just that, one weary word of agreement, and it was taken up, and the mood turned not to bloodlust but to something better, something like the first easing of a long-clenched fist. And I found Aloin's face again across the crowd, and this time she was not weighing me. This time she gave me the smallest nod, the smallest possible nod, and it was worth more than the crown. There was much to do, and I did it over the days that followed, and I did it in the open, still lodging at the mill, though I could have taken the finest hall in the region, because I was not finished being near her, and she had not asked me to go. The granary was opened. The town's own grain, all that had not yet been shipped, went back to the town under an honest measure, and the great last load in the barge's belly was carried back up the hill on the backs of laughing men who a week before had been too weak to laugh. I sent a highhold for more real stores, the king's true stores, released now that I knew where the leak had been and could stop it. The ration ended. The mill ran full for the first time in a year, and the whole town, for a few days, smelled of flour and warm bread and the sweet dust that hangs where grain is ground, the smell it should always have had. And I stood in the mill yard one morning and breathed it in and felt something in me heal that I had not known was wounded. And in the middle of all of it, on the third evening, Aloin came and found me where I stood by the sluice she had once cleared beside me, and she said, "Walk the low lanes with me. There's a new baby at the Harrow house the mother still can't feed proper, and old Pell's cough is worse, and I've a basket." And she had a basket. And she held it out not to hand me, but the old way, the way that meant carry it, walk with me, be part of the one thing that is wholly mine. And I understood what she was offering, and my throat closed, and I took the basket. We walked the low lanes in the dusk the way we had before everything, the king and the miller's daughter, and at the Harrow door and the Pell door and all the others she gave a little and I carried the rest. And it was exactly as it had been, and it was entirely different. And neither of us spoke of the difference until the basket was empty, and we stood at the top of the lane where the low town looked down on the river in the last light. "I've decided some things," she said, looking at the water and not at me, the old kindness, the giving of room. "I decided I'm angry with you, and I'm going to go on being angry for a while, because you let me beg you and you let me grieve 2 days I didn't have to grieve, and that doesn't come free just because you had reasons, even good ones. You should know that going in, if there's a going in." She drew a breath. "And I decided the other thing. I decided that the man who carried this basket through these lanes and listened to me talk about the bread, I decided he was real. I've been watching you for 3 days be a king, and you're the same man. You freed my father and let me be the one to do it. You had the whole town's hate in your hand in that square, and you gave it back to them lighter. You've slept in a cold mill loft when there's a warm hall an hour's ride off, and I finally understood you're doing it because you won't leave before I've had my say, and you'd wait in that cold loft a year if I asked you to." She turned and looked at me then, full on. "So the man's real. I know that now. What I don't know, what I need you to tell me plain, king, no rags and no cleverness, is what you want. Because there's a word your soldier didn't say on that key, and I've felt it hanging in the air between us since the first day at the mill, and I'm not going to guess at it. Say it plain or let it go. I've had enough of things being hidden. And so, at the top of the low lane in the last gray light, with an empty basket between us and the river below and a fortnight of lies finally all burned away, I said it plain. "You're my fated mate," I said. "That's the word. That's what my captain didn't say and what I've carried since the morning you broke your bread and gave me the larger half. Among my kind it happens once, if it happens at all, and most of us live and die and it never comes, and we half stop believing it's real. I stopped believing it. I have worn this crown 20 years and buried the people who wore it before me, and I made peace long ago with the likelihood that I would rule alone and die alone, and the bond was a story we tell to make the cold bearable. And then I rode into a hungry town in a dead man's cloak to hunt a thief, and a starving woman I had never seen knelt in the mud to feed a child that wasn't hers when she thought no one who mattered was watching, and something in my chest that had been cold for years came back to life, all at once, like a coal breathed on. And the next day you broke your last bread and gave me the better half in a cold yard, and my wolf, who has not spoken plainly to me since my father died, said one word. I stopped. He said mine, and he was right, and I have known it every hour since, through every lie I told you, and it is the truest thing in me and the thing I was most afraid to say, because a mate is not a thing a man commands. It is a thing two people choose, or it is nothing. So there it is, plain. You are my fated mate. I love you, not the bond, though the bond is real. I, the man, love you for the bread and the low lanes and the widow's corn and the way you'd rather starve than learn to call the worst answer wisdom. And I want to spend my life beside you, and you owe me nothing for saying it. The bond gives me no claim on you. Nothing gives me a claim on you. You are the freest person I have ever known, and I would sooner cut off my own hand than take that freedom from you. So I've said it plain. And now I'm going to do the hardest thing, which is stand here and want you and not reach for you, and let it be entirely your choice, the way everything you've ever given anyone has been entirely your choice. Choose me or don't. I'll honor it either way, but you'll never have to guess again. She was quiet a long time. The river ran below us in the dusk. And then she said, in a voice gone soft and unsteady, "You do understand I'm a miller's daughter. That I've patches on everything I own and flour I'll never wash out of my hands, and I've never in my life been more than a day's walk from this town. Kings don't call, Torin, whatever I'm to call you. Kings don't marry the miller's daughter. There's a whole world of lords and their fine daughters that a king's meant to." "There is a whole world," I said, "of lords and their fine daughters, not one of whom knelt in the mud to feed a child that wasn't hers when she thought no one was watching. I did not ride 200 miles to find the finest daughter in the realm. I rode out to find the truest heart in it, though I didn't know that's what I was doing. I thought I was hunting a thief. I found both. The heart is you. It was always going to be you. Rank is a thing men invented to sort themselves. The bond is older than rank, and so is bread given from an empty basket, and I know which of the three I'll build a life on. Marry me, Aloan, not because I'm the king, because I'm the man who carried your basket. Be my queen because you'd have loved the beggar, and let the crown catch up as it can." And Aloan, the miller's daughter, looked at the alpha king of the gray reach standing before her in a beggar's cloak with an empty charity basket at his feet. And she did the thing she had done to a hungry child and a hungry town and a hungry stranger. The thing she did whenever she found a hunger she could answer. She stepped forward, and she gave. She took my face in both her cold, flowered hands, the way she had that very first day, and she said, "Yes. God help us both, yes. But you'll go on being sorry for those 2 days a good while yet. And you'll never once take a thing from anyone in my sight that they didn't freely give, king or no." And I said I swore it. I swore it. And she pulled my face down to hers and kissed me, freely, choosing it, and the warmth in my chest that had started with a broken heel of bread, and never once gone out, went up at last into a steady flame that has never since guttered, not in all the years, not once. And on the back of my hand in that moment, and on hers, the mate mark bloomed, the old sign of a bond both halves have freely chosen, that cannot be forced and cannot be faked and comes only when two wills meet and neither is compelled. A pale silver curve like a crescent, like a wolf at rest, warm to the touch, hers matching mine. And far off in the dusk above the river, I heard them, and so did she, the spirit wolves, the old glowing shapes that our people say gather only where a true bond is sealed, drifting pale and luminous through the winter trees, come to witness that the king of the gray reach had found the other half of himself in a mill town he had come to only to hunt a thief. She caught her breath at the sight of them, and I held her, and we watched them fade, and neither of us spoke, because some things are past speaking. We were bonded that spring in Larkalow, not at Highhold. She asked for it there in the town among the people of the low lanes, and I would have given her the moon, so I gave her that easily. The widow Sarn stood among the witnesses. Old Pell, kind again now that he was able, the way she always swore everyone would be, brought a carved spoon as his gift and wept giving it. Her father Aldous walked her through the town he had milled for all his life to a king who had hauled his grain sacks in disguise, and gave her hand to mine with flour still ground into the creases of his. And I have kept, framed in my own hall at Highhold, a heel of dark bread gone hard as stone, hers, the first, the better half, because I never want to forget the whole of my kingdom fit once in a girl's empty basket, and I nearly rode past it. But the songs, when they sing this, always end at the bonding, and they leave out the part that matters most to me, so I will tell it last. When I went home to Highhold that summer with Aloan beside me as queen, I did not simply hang Vane's crimes on Vane and call the wound closed. I had learned in a fortnight in a beggar's cloak the thing that no ledger had ever taught me, that a king who governs by report governs blind, and that grain can vanish between a king's open hand and his people's empty mouths, while every book says all is well, and that the only cure is that the poorest must have a voice the powerful cannot silence or spend. So I made a law, and it stands in the Grey Reach to this day, and Aloan wrote the first draft of it in her own flowered hand at my council table while the old lords blinked. We call it the miller's share. No grain requisitioned in the king's name may leave a town until that town's own people, not its steward, not its lord, but a council of its common folk, chosen by the low lanes, have confirmed with their own seal that their own bellies are full first. No wagon rolls uphill until the widows have counted their corn. And every year at the dark of the moon that once nearly carried a barge of stolen bread across the border, the crown itself sends grain down to the poorest lanes of every town in the Reach, and puts it into the hands of the hungry, freely, owed to no one. The way a thin girl once put a broken heel of bread into the hands of a stranger who turned out to be her king. Because I never again want to be a ruler who might have ridden past the truest heart in his realm without knowing it. And because the whole of what I am, the crown and the wolf and the man, was kindled back to life by a share of bread from someone who had almost nothing and gave it anyway. She still walks the low lanes with a basket, my queen. I still carry it. And when the spirit wolves drift pale through the winter trees above whatever town we're in, the people point and say the king and his queen have come, and the old ones tell the children the story of the beggar who was a king and the miller's daughter who fed him without knowing, and the children always ask the same thing, how did she not know? And Aloan always gives the same answer, the one that undoes me every time, no matter how many years go by. I did know, she says, not that he was the king, but I knew he was hungry, and that was the only thing that ever mattered. I fed the hunger in front of me. It's a very simple thing to do. You should all try it. You never know, and here she looks at me, every time across whatever fire we're sitting at, with the whole of my life in her eyes. You never know who you'll find you've been feeding all along.